We are heading into another contentious presidential election. And I know that many of us are people of faith, and many of us are people who care about character and gentleness and values. Some of us are people who, in light of the divisions in our culture and our politics, are inclined to disengage altogether. And today we're asking the question, whatever category you fall into, what are we to do? This is Amy Julia Becker, and you are listening to Reimagining the Good Life, a podcast about challenging the assumptions about what makes life good, proclaiming the inherent belovedness of every human being, and envisioning a world of belonging. Today I'm talking with Michael Ware, the founder, president, and CEO of the Center for Christianity and Public Life, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit institution based in the nation's capital and with the mission to contend for the credibility of Christian resources in public life for the public good. For well over a decade, Michael has served as a trusted resource and advisor for a range of civic leaders, including President Obama, on matters of faith and public life. He is the author of The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life, and we get to talk about that book specifically today. One more thing, if you're listening to this on the day that it actually came out and landed in your podcast feed, I want to remind you that the first session of my Reimagining Family Life with Disability workshop starts tomorrow. And that means that there is still time to register. We will put a link for this workshop in the show notes. And if you can't make it this time, but you're interested in taking it personally at a later date, if you're interested in offering this workshop to your group in the future, subscribe to my email list and you will be the first to know when the next workshop is offered. All right, here is my conversation with Michael Ware. Michael, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Amy Julia. It's so great to be with you. Yeah.
Well, I want to start with some backstory because I know that you were a staffer in the White House under President Obama. So we're now going back in history, even though it's like so much a part of my adult life.
Yeah.
But will you tell us about your time in the White House? Like, what was your role there? How did you end up in that position? Because I do think it sets up what we're going to talk about in some ways that might be helpful.
Yeah. So my role in the White House, I was in something called the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And, I think a lot of people, will say, oh, you worked at the White House, you saw politics up close, you saw like religion up close and religious leaders. You must be so, disenchanted and this and that. I left the White House feeling more hopeful about the future of the country and the church than I was when I came in, because my role was working with Christian organizations and leaders, along with others who were serving those in need and that were doing good work around the country and around the world. And so I met some of the most incredible people, that I've ever known during that time. And it was, the office helps to connect organizations that are serving those in need with the government, with federal resources, and seeks to partner with them in all kinds of ways. And so that was my role for 3.5 years. It wasn't all sort of holding hands and sort of, but I don't think there has been a time in my life in which I've been more prayed for than those years in the White House, and they were really, precious. It was a wonderful season. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So this is really broad strokes, but if you were to say a couple of things that you learned from that experience that have shaped your understanding of both faith and politics, how are you carrying forward that time as you think about both faith and politics now?
Yeah. One, the conversation about politics is so often detached and removed from the work of politics.
Can you say more on that? Like, tell me what that means.
Yeah. One way to think about it in The Spirit of Our Politics, in the new book, I share a term and concept that was developed by this political scientist, Eitan Hirsch, called political hobbyism.
Right.
And a political hobbyist is someone who, might consume a lot of news. A political hobbyist is following all the latest sort of political gossip. They
Mm-hmm.
never actually get around to doing the work of politics. They
Mm.
never, they are both burnt out by politics and in some ways totally removed from it.
Okay.
Think of this as sort of politics as entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the actual work of politics is often not entertaining. It is often not splashy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something I learned, and that can be true both among specific people and organizations, like learning, like, yeah, there are some people who talk a lot about politics and some organizations that talk about politics a lot, but they aren't really actually getting anything done.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, like individuals, there are some individuals and organizations that for an array of reasons, when they're communicating publicly or when they have a particular when they're in a particular setting, might have one affect or might say one set of things, but then when you're actually working with them, it's a whole other story. So I just learned a lot about the culture of our politics and the work of our politics. You can be involved in political life and not submit to the logic of our politics.
Yeah. So again, will you say a little more about what you mean? That's a great statement.
Yeah. So one way I talk about it in the book is this idea, this term political sectarianism, which describes the kind of polarization we have today. And this political sectarianism doesn't describe everything that's wrong with our politics.
Mm-hmm.
It does help inform quite a bit of what's happening in our political life today. And the social scientists who developed it said that it's made up basically of three parts: the tendency of aversion, which is the tendency to dislike or distrust those who are politically different; the tendency of othering, so the tendency to other those who are politically different; and then the tendency of moralization, or what I call a misplaced moralization, which is to elevate political difference to the level of dogma, to the level of iniquity, and that the logic of that kind of politics, which is pervasive in our politics today, leads to some really drastic and destructive places, both for our politics itself. So the social sciences lay out all the ways in which this has links to governance and governmental dysfunction. But I think what's even closer to my heart, is the ways in which the toxicity of our political culture is spilling over into and affecting and shaping the lives of our families, our churches, our communities, and individuals. And so, so let me give you a concrete example. There's a chapter in the book about gentleness, and I talk extensively about anger. And one of the things that I'm sorting through about how best to engage this thought. So in the chapter, I reject our sort of high esteem for anger and what it can accomplish in our politics. I have been a bit confounded. I understand why, and I gave a talk on Capitol Hill to over 100 congressional staffers on this topic. I understand why they have challenges understanding how they might be able to go about their work without promoting or seeking to steward or incite anger. There's a professional sort of, there's a capital. What I've been really struck by is those with no political responsibility outside of being a citizen, outside of who uh, have real trouble contemplating what it would be like for them to engage in politics without anger.
Yeah. So in other
It
words,
is,
can I make sure I'm understanding? Like, if you're on the inside and you're working for a politician, you're going to say things that might incite anger, whether or not you intend to. But if you're on the outside, like me, for example, like to assume that anger has to be a part of politics is like, just not true, if nothing else. Like,
well, and also congressional, one of the things that's happening in our politics right now is that politicians are being asked to reflect the anger of voters.
okay. Yeah.
And so,
So it's like
if
a
it,
cycle too.
yeah, right. And so there's this saying, if you aren't angry, you aren't paying attention.
Right.
As if
Okay.
the best thing that your attention could, the highest, the highest response that one could offer to paying attention is their anger.
Which is
Uh,
so interesting when we think about, I don't know, I've thought a lot about the way
yeah.
in which love and attention are related, that like
Yes.
you can't
Right.
love something or someone that you don't
Yes.
pay attention to. And
Yes. Yes.
so
Yes.
I just wonder about even like having, and I think your book does this, but the contrast between like if you're not angry, you're not paying attention to, and like if you're not loving, you're not paying attention. Like,
Yes.
and I'm sure there's some
Right.
people who would say that the anger and love are actually connected, but at least in terms of what we're seeing in our country, that does not seem to be the case. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's helpful. Thank
Right.
you.
And that should cause us to, right, um, ask some questions about, if we so often see anger disconnected from love, maybe
Right.
that's not a coincidence.
Right.
Maybe anger doesn't trend towards love,
Yeah.
particularly a cultivated anger. So
Hmm.
not anger as an initial reaction to. I think that's and Dallas Willard, and maybe we'll talk about Dallas a
Yeah.
bit. My book is very much drawing on his work. Dallas talks about anger as a natural impulse is not by itself sinful, um, uh, but we need to be very well. So there's a very clear scriptural admonition to be slow to anger, and it's
Hmm.
not be slow to unjustified anger. It's
Hmm.
just be slow to anger. And there's like we should think about that. Well, why is that? Why might that be? And we could look to scripture. We could also look to Augustine, to Howard Thurman, to Dallas Will. Like there's long, rich history and
Yeah.
resources to draw
Yeah.
on here. But the real Augustine writes, we need to be careful about even opening the doors of our heart to even justified anger.
Hmm.
Because once you let it in, anger can fester and twist and compound and take over. And that's a lot of what we see in our political life today. And what's very important for folks to understand is that it is perhaps not even originating from our politics. So it's one thing to say, those politicians, we need to get those bums out, and we need
Yeah.
to get people of higher character in, and I'm all for that. But if we think that the problem is solved just by changing the cast of characters involved, that actually they're responding to the incentives that the people
Are
provide.
giving. Well,
Yeah.
this actually, I want to quote you as a part of exactly what you're saying. You write, if we were a different kind of people, our politics would be different.
Yeah.
And I noted that because I just wanted to ask you to reflect a little bit about like, well, what kind of people are we? And what
Mhm.
would it take to become a different kind of people? Which in some ways is asking you to like recap your whole book. But
Yeah.
at the same time, like just in general, I love that. If we were a different kind of people, our politics would be different, which I think is what you're saying. But can you speak to
Yes.
who are
Yes.
we as a people and what would it take for us to change?
Yes. So a contention of the book and of the Center for Christianity and Public Life, which is the organization I'm involved with, is that spiritual formation is central to civic renewal. That
Hmm.
the kind of people we are has much to do with the kind of politics and public life that we have. Now, it's not a perfect one-to-one, so like there are a lot of problems with translating the will of the people into politics. But at the end of the day, the state of our politics is a reflection of the state of our souls.
Mm.
Um, and if we had a different kind of people, our politics would be different. Another way of saying that is that our democracy, both the beauty and the weakness of it, our democracy cannot get around the kind of people we are.
Mm-hmm.
T.S. Eliot wrote the sort of great human endeavor, which he thought was a fool's errand. So this is an observation, not him saying this is a great idea. He said, the great human endeavor has been to try to create a system so perfect that people no longer have to be good. And I think that is the primary political conceit of our day, that we could create a system so perfect that we could have a system that pursues justice or reflects justice or without being a just people. We so often want our politics to do the work of being good for us, instead of our politics reflecting our own goodness. And so that's what this book is about, for people to take, we have a politics right now that asks people to take responsibility for things that they have so little responsibility for.
Mm-hmm.
Who wins the presidential election, and totally evades the responsibility, including the political responsibility that people, as Willard would say, is within the range of their effective will.
Yeah.
Like, are the things that they actually have say over. And so,
who's on your local school board? I mean, if we're talking politics, right? Local politics being one part of that.
Well, that's certainly closer to, but it's also, when you're in a political discussion, do you twist the truth? Do you lie in order to win the argument?
Yep.
Are you willing to belittle people or intimidate people with expressions of anger to get yourself out of a sticky situation?
Right. Well, and you give some examples towards the end of the book, like practices of reading wisely and widely and trying to actually come up with arguments against your own political perspective, assuming there are actually good ones out there, even if you won't end up agreeing with them, So, and those were really helpful. But before I keep going, I do want to ask you to just give the Dallas Willard, 101, because he is clearly so influential in this book. And I am someone who's read probably 3 books by Dallas Willard, and I've listened to some of his talks, so I do have some background. I'm assuming many listeners do not. So could you just tell us about Dallas Willard and why he is so prominent in what you're doing in this book and in general?
Yeah. So Dallas passed just over a decade ago. He was a philosopher. He taught at the University of Southern California for almost half a century. He was chair of the philosophy department for a time. He was also, so USC is a secular state school. USC, Willard was also a Christian teacher, author, pastor at various points during his life. And I came across his work within my first 6 months of working at the White House. I was, someone sent me a copy of The Divine Conspiracy, and at first I didn't think I had time to read it. And then for a number of reasons, I decided to pick it up, and it was like a second spiritual awakening in my life. And I could talk quite a bit about why that was. Dallas thought Jesus's gospel was the announcement of the availability of the kingdom of God in the here and now for whoever would stumble into it.
Yeah.
And he thought that he wrote a book, The Great Omission, which is about the omission of the making of disciples from the Great Commission. And he thought discipleship was about, and really the Christian life, like the point of life is to learn from Jesus how Jesus would live your life if he were you. And this vision of formation is more than intellectual head knowledge. It's more than what you do on retreat or what you do in your quiet time. It's for all of life. And this book draws on Willard, just because my own views are just so informed by Dallas. Again, going to the beginning of our conversation, when people hear about politics, a whole range of, I think, unhelpful assumptions and dispositions are brought to mind. And this book is about how do we place politics and our political lives within and under the life we're living with Jesus. And so I think people who pick up this book might be surprised to find that it's a spiritual formation book first, not a political book. And Willard was someone who taught during the 80s and 90s and 2000s, very complicated times in American public life when it came to religion. And he was someone who never took his eye off the ball. There wasn't a season of Dallas's life where, he synonymized following Jesus with supporting a political candidate or a particular policy issue. And so Dallas is, a conversation partner for me just in living my life, but also has just greatly informed my views on a number of things, including politics.
I love that so much. And I think it plays right into a question I have for you. This is another quotation. The crisis today is not, from your book, the crisis today is not that Christians are politically homeless, but rather that they ever thought they could make their home in politics at all. And I've heard so many people describe themselves as politically homeless. And we could, think about why that is. And yet I'd love to hear you talk about the problem with thinking that we can make our home in politics.
Yes. Politics. I advance some principles for thinking about politics in the book. One of them is that politics is not ultimate, but penultimate. Politics is prudential, not dogmatic. And if we get these things confused, if we treat politics as a grantor of identity,
right,
then we will find ourselves subject to its logic, which is not the logic of the kingdom of God.
So can you, I want to ask you about two things there. Like, tell me the difference between the logic of politics and the logic of the kingdom of God.
I think Dallas's primary concern with politics is its ability to create a sort of pseudo reality, a kind of pseudo set of knowledge. So, how political decisions are made in a democratic society is not by knowledge, but by advocacy, by winning a vote.
Yep.
And for Christians, if we are engaging in politics, not with our feet planted in the gospel, but with our feet planted in politics, saying, well, politics is its own sort of, we need to make sure that we're effective in politics. So that means sort of not just playing by its rules, but by taking on the tools of politics, all of them, including those that I don't think Christians would pick up. That then we are making discipleship, we are making faithfulness, the possibility of it, incoherent. But what we often tell ourselves is like that politics doesn't count, just like we tell ourselves other areas of our life doesn't count. Well, running a business, everyone who runs a business like mine, end of the year comes up, the numbers aren't quite making sense. But I know the business down the street. I know that he moves some numbers around, and that's just the way things go. That's just how things operate. So I'm not operating by anything other than the status quo of my field. And people go into politics, which with much the same sort of rationalization, which is like, yes, I wouldn't talk to people in my real life or in my normal life the way that I talk to people when politics is sort of on the table. But this is politics. Politics ain't beanbag. And what's amazing to me is, just to people will say politics ain't beanbag who don't have any, who aren't press secretaries for politics. They're just living their lives, but
Right.
that's how pervasive and how powerful sort of the political logic can be, that we actually take it on for ourselves, when instead Christians have resources to draw on that we can bring with us to politics, that we can actually that would, if we took them up, change the incentive structure that our politicians are responding to. But too often we're in the place of actually sacrificing the knowledge that we have in favor of a political knowledge, which has failed in its own right, but has certainly failed in light of what we know to be true about the kingdom of God, about the kind of people we need to be successful in politics, and that just has to be rejected. And just one note here, Amy Julia, which is, I hope folks, this does not just apply to politicians. This is for you in the life that you're living, that I'm living. We want to place all of it under the jurisdiction of love. So God's kingdom is the range of his effective will, where what he wants done is done. Willard would say each of us have our own kind of little kingdoms, where the range of our effective will, where what we want to be done is done. And at least in this context, the American context, Canadian context, democratic societies, politics falls within the range of our effective will. Not everything that happens in politics, but our votes, our political participation, however far that extends. And what it means to follow Jesus is that we are learning from Jesus how to place that which is within the range of our effective will within and under his will and his reign. And there is knowledge available about what that, we don't just make it up. It's righteousness and justice, gentleness and kindness. Yeah.
Well, and that leads to, I have a couple of different questions, but I think I'll skip ahead in my own notes to the idea of spiritual formation as something that really shapes and forms our political engagement. So I'm curious if you could just speak to some of the habits or practices that could lead us towards a different type of political engagement, because we've been spiritually formed in a different way, because we've been becoming those types of people, because we've been actually seeking to participate in the logic of the kingdom of Jesus instead of the kingdom of political superiority.
Yeah. So in the book, I offer, I do two things. I seek to connect historical practices of the faith that have served the church well, that we find in the life of Jesus, and connect how they might relate to our political lives. So these are things like celebration and worship and study. And I think particularly important in this time and place, silence and solitude. And I'll just a couple words there. We are just inundated with messages and grasping and people vying for our attention and our affections. And what silence and solitude can do is they can help remind us that we are more than just the sum of the various inputs that we're receiving. Willard said, you may find that you have a soul, and be conscious of that. You may find that what you were so sure of when you were in the to and fro of our public life, you don't even realize it, but you get news updates on your phone and they're communicating something. But in silence and solitude, you may realize that maybe your political enemies aren't exactly what you had built them up to be in your mind. Maybe they're failed imperfect human beings just like you, and
Right.
maybe they have are a mixture of motivations and that kind of thing. And so I talk a good deal about silence and solitude,
Mm.
prayer, and so fasting. um, then I also offer kind of what I call sort of 21st century disciplines that are for this particular moment. As you said, there are things like um, uh, there's a section about how we consume news and
Yeah.
thinking about
Great.
how to approach news. There are things like breaking groupthink. There are things
Hmm.
like bearing one another's burdens and what that might look like in our political life.
Yeah.
And so these practices, and what's really important, I think sometimes when people hear about practices, they think, oh gosh, another checklist of things that I need to do to qualify as a good Christian. And
Mm.
that's not what this is at all. What it is, assess your own life, and what are the, when you're in a political discussion, or when you're thinking about voting, uh, what are the things that happen in and through you? And uh, uh, disciplines can be sort of off the spot training, so that we can
Mm.
act when we're on the spot in a way that is consistent
Yeah.
with and has integrity with the kind of person that we're seeking to become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. This is backing up a bit in what
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
said, because I've also been thinking about the way, and I think this is actually, well, sorry, blah, 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 blah. I'm thinking about some studies that have shown that parents are concerned now about their children marrying someone from the opposite political
Yeah.
party in a way that they used to be about race or religion, right? Like it used to be like,
Yes.
oh no, you can't marry someone who's not from our church, essentially, or you can't marry someone. So which I think is an indication of the ways in which politics has become a form of identity in a different way than it was in the past.
Yes.
So I'm curious why that is the case. Like, why has politics and identity become more enmeshed, or whatever it is, than it used to be? Where do you think that's coming from?
Yeah. I think there are a number of reasons. One of them is just the increasing sophistication, reach, and financial resources behind and in our politics.
Mm.
It is Political parties do not need to be treated as brands or as sources of identity. There is another conception of a political party, which is a vehicle for mediating difference, political difference, not just between the parties themselves, but within the parties.
Hmm.
Um, and if you think of political parties in that way, then it's quite foolish to um, be treating political parties as a source of identity, because the whole point of them, well, I mean, in just what we see in history, and like look at the party platforms for either of our parties from 2020 to 2008, and there are some through lines that you could find, but also massive changes just over
Yeah.
the course of 12 years.
Right.
That there are two platforms in between those platforms, and so, but here's the thing: if 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 we can be made to treat our political parties as brands, as things we identify with, as things that we take our marching orders from, that does make the job of political parties so much easier. So if
Hmm.
their job is actually to mediate difference internal to the party, but instead, uh, 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 what the actual practice is, whatever the party decides actually filters down, as
Hmm.
opposed to difference being reconciled and filtered up,
Hmm.
then that really that's really convenient for political
Right.
parties. But that's not the way it has to be. It's not the way it should be. It's not even a sensible way of approaching things. There are other things. I mean, right, Amy, Julia, we could talk about people are increasingly going to politics to fill and meet spiritual and emotional needs
Mm-hmm.
that they typically could have met elsewhere. But
Yeah.
and this goes into, without having time to go deeper, it gets in the language of tropes. But I mean, we have an individualized, atomized society,
Mm-hmm.
mediating institutions, which have long been a distinctive of American culture, are still there, but they're thinning out. Church attendance is plummeting.
Right.
The rise of religious disaffiliation is, or the level of religious disaffiliation is rising. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
all of these tectonic shift plates contribute to that as well. So it's multivariable, but I think it's clear that it's happening, and that's part of what political sectarianism is trying to put a framework around and trying to categorize.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm curious. I've a couple other things here, like kind of to dig down. One is just that I have a lot of people in my life who are basically like, okay, this is a mess. There's so much divisiveness. There's so much vitriol. I just want to check out of it. Like, isn't that
Yeah.
the right? Like, isn't just walking away, given our current situation, the best thing to do? What would you say to those listeners, to the ones who want to disengage entirely?
Yeah. As assuming these are Americans,
Right. Yep.
um, as a citizen, you do not choose to have political influence. You already have it.
Hmm.
The only choice you have, the real choice you have, is not whether you have political influence or not, and not even whether you're using your political influence or not. Um, but how?
Hmm.
Are you stewarding the influence that you have uh, uh, as is what is driving you the level of emotional satisfaction you do or do not get from our politics? Or is there something else? I've argued that politics is an essential forum in which we can love our neighbors, not
Hmm.
the essential forum, not the only, but an essential forum. And so we just want to steward the limited influence that we have towards the good of our neighbors as an outflow of and originating from the love that we have for God.
Hmm.
Um, One thing I would just encourage people to consider is, we're now multiple decades into institutional disengagement, including from our political institutions. So the number of the percentage of political independence in our country. So some people would think, well, we're more divided than we ever have been. The political parties seem to be more extreme than they ever have been. Um, uh, I am sure that this means that the political parties are stronger than they ever have been.
Mm.
No, they're actually weaker than they ever have been. We actually have the highest percentage of Americans who identify as politically independent as ever before.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't know
Ever
that.
before. So a plurality of Americans identify as politically independent. And so one thing we need to consider is whether the very kind of people who want to withdraw from our politics because it's too divisive, too
Hmm.
angry, too trivial, our political culture is too trivial, are the very kinds of people that our politics needs.
Right.
The very kinds of people our politics needs. And what I would argue has been one of the things that's happening is that the actors who make our politics so toxic are driving people. I don't have time for this. I don't want, and so they drive them out, and then they just claim more and more territory.
Right.
And so our politics just gets more and more toxic, not because they're even necessarily winning, but just because others are just vacating the playing field.
Right.
I hate to use a sort of, but
Yeah.
they're vacating our political life,
Mm.
and so we should, so that might be something to motivate a healthy engagement as opposed to a withdrawal, which is, um, like the cavalry isn't coming. Like you actually, what you identify as wrong in our politics is actually spot on. But the beauty and weakness of our democracy is that our democracy can't get around the kind of people we are.
Right.
And so who's there? Who's showing up?
Well, maybe that's a good place to kind of land this conversation. I was wondering, this is a podcast about reimagining the good life, kind of using our imaginations to say, is it possible for things to change or to be different in ways that are hard for me to imagine? And I was thinking about one of the ways that I'm able to imagine things that seem impossible is by seeing other people who've either done it or are doing it. And so I was curious whether there are examples of people of faith who've engaged politics, whether in the past or in the present, in ways you at one point called politics like something we can do as an act of loving service. Like who has done this or who is doing this? Could you share that with us?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, countless people. I talk in my book about the experience of Ruby Bridges, and I won't sort of recount that here, but I think that's a really valuable and challenging witness. I mean, I think as you look through history, I mean, right, like you think about the Wilberforces, the Kings, the Fannie Lou Hamers, but I think what I'd like to point out to folks is like most of how this happens is, relatively like unnamed people who are just faithful. Like I have a friend who spent the last couple of years doing hard, thankless work around issues involving the community pool in his town.
Yeah.
He is someone I think of because there's a real need. He identified a real need, a civic need, that involves self-governance, that is the product of and requires community decisions, civic decisions. And he said, I'm not just going to be a bystander. I'm going to be a part of this, even though like it gets political, because if the money is being spent on the community pool, well, where isn't it getting spent? And then he has to ask himself, well, I got involved in this because of the community pool, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I oppose, now I'm, as a hypothetical, that doesn't necessarily mean I oppose the tennis court or raising the pay of the county clerk, like it's so all, you get, and it's messy and it's, but that's okay. Politics is a prudential area of life. God is not looking over our shoulder, ready to discipline us for a poor political judgment. We are just seeking to, in the place and the time in which he's called us, to use what we have and to steward what we have in a way that reflects our love of him and love of neighbor. And I could tell you countless stories of seeing that in our public life. I see it. The organization I'm involved with, we serve young professionals, we serve elected leaders, and these are people who are imperfectly seeking to learn from Jesus how he would live their life if he were them. And it's a beautiful possibility. And if we were able to gain an imagination for it and live into that imagination, like the eunuch in Acts 8, if we were people who were so captured by the gospel that as we were riding in our chariot, we saw water and said, why shouldn't I get baptized? Isn't this the next thing that Jesus is calling me to do? What if we went through our public life, our politics, and said, look at that. I mean, actually, I've never, in the case of my friend, he literally saw a pool of water and said, maybe the Lord is calling me to get involved here. And that's not the whole of life. That's not, that's not the only area of life to which we're called to do this, but that's kind of the point. We're living a life with Jesus with the whole of our lives, and for all of us listening, I would venture that includes politics.
Michael, thank you so much for your time, but also for your book and for your work, just your ongoing faithfulness to this calling. And I haven't said this already in this conversation. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I just want to also emphasize the fact that this is not a book for the right or the left, which perhaps has been evident by the conversation, and that we haven't been running down kind of rabbit trails of, but what do you think about this issue? Because I think so much of what you're writing about is the posture of the heart and the ways in which we can actually engage issues that have good arguments on the left and the right with a different posture, and actually have a new imagination for where we might end up as a people.
Yeah. Thank you for, that's exactly right. And I just so appreciate you and your work, and really lovely to have a conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, as always, for listening to this episode of Reimagining the Good Life. I'd love for you to take a minute to rate or review or share it with others. Don't forget to subscribe to get email updates, learn more details about this Reimagining Family Life with Disability workshop. And I would love to hear from you. My email is amyjuliabeckerwriter@gmail.com. I want to end with thanks to Jake Hansen for editing the podcast, to Amber Beery, my social media coordinator, who does everything else to make sure it happens. And thank you for being here. I hope this conversation helps you to challenge assumptions, proclaim the belovedness of every human being, and envision a world of belonging. Let's reimagine the good life together.